Welcome to Jerry Recaps. The story continues. YuWon tossed his inventory pouch onto the floor as if he no longer required it. Hyun was shocked. She picked up his pouch and verified that there was really nothing inside. You're serious? Hyun and Songchan were dumbfounded. They had assumed that he had kept some for himself. What are you going to do now? You should have kept 50 for yourself. YuWon shrugged his shoulders. I told you. I'm not going. After hearing YuWon repeat himself, the two finally understood what he meant. By not going, he meant that he had no intention to move on to the next tutorial. What are you going to do? They were left speechless. YuWon's eyes went back and forth between his empty box and the people who were unable to purchase essence from him. Cross over already. This place is going to be a madhouse soon. Hyun and Songchan looked at YuWon in a daze for a moment. Joyeon hesitated for a moment, but Songchan took her away. They instantly entered the gate to cross over to the next tutorial. Done doing business, YuWon got up while stretching his arms. There was about an hour and a half left. I think the next tutorial was defense. Quite a few people crossed over. So the next tutorial shouldn't be too hard. The tutorial wasn't called the tutorial for no reason. It was actually laid out in a simple structure compared to the various missions required to climb the tower. The first was survival. The second was competition. The third was hunting. And the fourth was defense. Are you all sold out of essence? Even though one could easily see that there was no more essence, a middle-aged man wearing small-framed glasses came up and asked YuWon. YuWon nodded his head and replied, "Stores closed." The man slumped to the ground after hearing his response. Other people had a similar reaction. After watching them for a moment, YuWon left. There was no longer a reason for him to remain there. It'll start soon. There were approximately 20 people left. YuWon knew they would start fighting each other to steal essence from one another. About half of them would survive while the other half died, and YuWon had no intentions of intervening and deciding who would live or die. That's why YuWon left. As soon as the major player in the center of the crowd vanished, people started moving, but YuWon had no time to pay attention to what they were up to. There was only about an hour left until the end of the tutorial. Shop. YuWon spoke up. Suddenly the whole area started trembling, just like in the underground dungeon. YuWon's words created a rupture out of thin air. This was a normal phenomenon when a lackey appeared during the tutorial. However, this rupture was much larger than YuWon expected. No way. It was exactly what YuWon thought it was. From inside the massive rupture, a familiar tall hobo came out. It was the tutorial's administrator. Did you call? The administrator spoke in an irritated tone. I wasn't calling for you, sir. What YuWon needed was the shop, and for that, he needed lackey's help. Unlike inside the tower, it was impossible to use the shop during the tutorial without a lackey. Why did you come instead of a lackey? I'm currently hiring some newbies because we lost a lot of guys. Though we still need to lose a few more. The admin replied. Were you able to weed many of them out? YuWon was curious about the result of his report, so he asked. About 1 in 3 had a connection. Many of them took quite a lot of bribes. After leaving the management of the tutorial to the lackeys, the administrator hadn't intervened in the tutorial for a long time. But after the latest incident, the administrator was likely going to be busy for a while. And thanks to you, quite a few of my men got tied up in this sector. To the point that other sectors are facing delays. Why is that my fault? YuWon knew that he had created a lot of trouble for the admin, but it was also the admin's duty to keep everything in check. Because over 100 people used the shop simultaneously to trade with you. The administrator wasn't wrong. It was rare for 2 or more participants in a sector to use the shop at the same time. Coupled with the fact that there were far more survivors in Hongdae compared to the other sectors, it wasn't odd that there weren't enough lackeys to meet the demands of all the people wanting to use the shop at the same time. Isn't that a good thing? The business was booming. But are you really that short on men? Coming here yourself just because someone wanted to use the shop. No matter how short on men he might be, an administrator was the highest authority of the tutorial. Operating the shop should be the job of a lowly lackey, so it was highly unusual that the administrator appeared in person for such a task. Well, that's certainly true. It's not just because of the shop. Then what is this about, sir? YuWon asked curiously. Are you really unaware of the position you're in? It took a second, but YuWon nodded his head, understanding what the administrator meant. Special administrative target. YuWon assumed that to be the position he was in right now. Special administrative targets referred to participants that needed supervision for really standing out and displaying strange behaviors. But when an administrator can't prove anything, they usually just let it slide. This administrator clearly had no intention of letting YuWon's existence slide. It would have been weirder if he didn't find YuWon suspicious, especially now. It's the end of the third tutorial, and you currently hold over 160,000 points, not to mention your levels. You have enough power to destroy the entire ecosystem of the tutorial. Under normal circumstances, one should constantly feel like they don't have enough points during the tutorial because that was the only way to discern whether or not one had the qualifications to enter the tower. However, the number of points YuWon held far exceeded that of any other participant. That's exactly it, YuWon said while nodding his head, that's what I want. There's no problem since that is the path I've chosen. The administrator was at a loss for words, seeing YuWon's brazen attitude. Saying that he wanted to destroy the ecosystem of the tutorial. I have managed the tutorial for a truly long time. But I have never encountered someone quite like you. YuWon checked the time. While conversing with the administrator, 10 minutes had already passed. I want to use the shop. He no longer had time to continue chatting. Even if he was the administrator, he couldn't go against the rules of the tower and deny a participant the usage of the shop. The administrator held his hand out to YuWon and opened his palm. Tell me what you need. From his palm was the size of YuWon's head. The shop's catalog opened up. YuWon browsed through the catalog. Is this the extent of items I can purchase in the tutorial? After looking through the catalog for 30 minutes, YuWon nodded his head. Well, to start with. YuWon pointed his finger. I'll take this, please. He had spent 10,000 points to purchase middle-class inventory. It can be activated by just saying or thinking the word inventory. Though YuWon purchased an item, there were no changes except the consumption of points. The personal inventory wasn't a visible item. Instead, it was like a convenient dimensional pocket where you could store items. YuWon flipped through the catalog and selected his next item. Next, I'll buy the Arctic Steel's sword. YuWon had spent 50,000 points to just purchase. After making the purchase, he obtained Arctic Steel's sword. In YuWon's grasp, a pure white sword appeared. It cost a total of 50k points. It was the first proper item that YuWon purchased, but instead of trying out his new sword. Open inventory. YuWon put his sword in his inventory in a hurry, and the Arctic Steel's sword vanished into thin air. The personal inventory was large enough for YuWon to store the few items he wanted and still have space remaining. The Arctic Steel's sword. You picked quite a challenging weapon. The administrator narrowed his eyes and stared at YuWon. He was clearly suspicious, but YuWon simply shrugged his shoulders and continued shopping. He spent another 60,000 points and purchased Pyromancy robe. Pyromancy robe was made from high-quality material and was infused with the highest level spell. It can protect the wearer from flames. The system notified you, you have spent 20,000 points. You have obtained Magic Nullification Shield. The Nullification Shield is able to nullify any type of magic attack. A crimson silk dragon robe and an azure-tinted round shield appeared above YuWon's head. He took off his old jacket. YuWon put on his crimson dragon robe and then tried out his new sword. It fits perfectly in his hand. YuWon draped the robe over his shoulders and wielded the shield. He had now spent a total of 140,000 points. They were all pretty valuable items. Items that cost more than 10k points were even usable pretty far up the tower, so these items were more than enough to disrupt the tutorial's ecosystem. Also, for ice crystals. YuWon again looked up the catalog to buy these. And in YuWon's hand, 4 crystal balls appeared. They were the width of a finger, and just like the Arctic Steel's sword, they were pure white. YuWon put the ice crystals into his inventory. The system notified you, you have spent 20,000 points. You have obtained 4 ice crystals. Now he only had 7,000 points remaining. Lastly, please give me a well-sharpened sword. YuWon asked the admin. The system notified you, you have spent 2,000 points. You have obtained a well-sharpened sword. Within YuWon's grasp, a cool-looking sword with a black hilt appeared. It was a pretty average sword and didn't have any special characteristics. Yet the reason why such a plain sword cost 2,000 points was that it was exceptionally sharp and durable. A sword that covers all the basics. That's quite the contrast compared to the overtly magical items. The admin tried to inquire YuWon's intentions. But YuWon shrugged it off with a simple answer, saying I quite like it. Points remaining, 5,400. Not a single participant in the tutorial should be able to pierce that robe. No one can touch you now, the administrator said with a questionable smile. Or at least the participants can't. YuWon didn't say anything. The administrator stared at YuWon for a while before turning away and walking back into the rupture. I have high hopes for you. The rupture swallowed the administrator. And that was the end of the trade with the administrator. YuWon recollected the face the administrator made and the words he said. Did he notice? It should have been expected. It would be strange if an entity like the administrator still hadn't caught on to YuWon's plans. I guess it doesn't matter. YuWon sat down to rest for the remaining time. It was crucial that he was in the best condition possible. And so, some amount of time passed. A ticking noise could be heard. It was truly a cruel sound. Tutorial stages with a time limit always tormented participants with the sound of the clock ticking right before it ended. YuWon looked up at the sky. So it's starting. It was the long-awaited moment. The clock finally reached 0. Finalizing the 3rd tutorial. The space itself started rupturing, showing the sign of destruction. You have failed the tutorial. The annihilation of the sector will now begin. The gate to cross over into the 4th tutorial disappeared. And it wasn't just that. The horde of monsters also disappeared, and the bizarre plants that wrapped around the buildings vanished as buildings returned back to their original layout. There were also some things that didn't change, such as the huge, invisible barrier that divided the sectors. But the biggest change was the sky. Long time no see. The sky turned scarlet, and the temperature suddenly spiked. Luckily, YuWon didn't feel too hot. YuWon checked the effects of the item he was wearing. Pyromancy robe. A robe enchanted with ancient magic. It's made from a special material. It does not burn and has strong resistance to fire attributes. A strong resistance, huh? It's not a bad item. It should work as a pretty good defensive item against fire even in the tower. It's definitely overkill to use it in the tutorial. Protection from hot weather would be a piece of cake for the robe. Needless to say, it was only YuWon who was receiving protection from the hot weather. Why is it so hot? Is this the end of the day? Please save me. Please. YuWon could hear screaming and crying in the distance. He turned his head towards the noise. So there are only 3 survivors. He could only hear and feel the presence of 3 people. The reason why those 3 were left behind is probably because all their essence combined totaled less than 50. They might have even surrendered their essence to someone else in order to avoid being murdered. YuWon started walking towards them. He couldn't feel the heat, but he could still tell that this place was getting progressively hotter. Why are you here? Why haven't you crossed over? The three people were confused to see YuWon. No one could have expected YuWon of all people to fail the tutorial. How could they? He was skilled enough to amass over 1,000 essence, far more than the required 50. YuWon glanced over their expressions. They looked as if they wanted something from YuWon. Did they want him to save them? But that was a pointless request. They were already drenched in sweat, their bodies unable to handle the heat. It looks like they're barely any different from normal people. This much heat should have been manageable if they had raised their constitution even a little bit. Yet they were sweating bullets, looking like they were about to faint at any moment. The earth shook, and the weather got as hot as it possibly could. It's so hot. The ground is shaking. Sounds of cracks could be heard everywhere. The ground split apart, and flames rose from the cracks. It burns! The cries of people started rising. Heatwaves continued to spew out of the ground until one man finally caught fire. And not longer after, the lady next to him also caught on fire. Please save me! I'm begging you. Please! They reached out their hands toward YuWon. YuWon thought about the ice crystals in his inventory. Would these three be able to live if he used the ice crystals to help them? He didn't get to be lost in thought for too long. YuWon shook his head and looked away. The world that had changed in a flash was laid out before his eyes. YuWon looked up at the sky. Annihilation, the 176th giant will now begin. The system notified. So it's begun. The sky turned a bright ruby red. The air wasn't getting any hotter, but the annihilation had already started. Everything was on fire with nowhere to escape. However, this world wouldn't call it annihilation over some fire and brimstone. A long, skinny hand shot out from the fissure in the ground. The hand was on fire, the flesh melting right off of it. The owner of the hand climbed out of the ground with great difficulty. It was a moving skeleton with almost no flesh. It wore clothes made of flames and held a torch in one hand. It was a trash-class demon, a skull. It wasn't alone. Coupled with flames, thin bones continued to pop out of the divided earth. Hundreds and thousands of skulls made their appearance. Yes. There sure are a lot, YuWon mumbled at the size of the horde. Trash-class demons were creatures that barely even qualified as demons. Technically, they were more like servants of demons, which is why they were called trash-class. Demons were one of the ruling races of the tower, along with gods, giants, and dragons. Such beings appearing in the tutorial were illogical. That's why it was called an annihilation. The ground rumbled, and all the skulls stopped in their tracks, looked in the direction of an unknown something, and bowed their heads to it. That could only signify one thing. The low-class demon, Surutra, has appeared. The system notified. It really appeared. A huge figure started appearing under the flames. YuWon smiled as he greeted the creature that changed the landscape into hell with its appearance. So we meet here, Surutra. One might be unimpressed because it was called low class, but a demon was still a demon. And if it really was the 176th giant that YuWon remembered, it should be more than capable of easily slaying a dragon hatchling. It wasn't this small during Ragnarok. He's only about as big as a house right now. A gigantic hand surfaced from the magma like subterranean fire. With a skull face and a majored body, Surutra wielded a giant flaming sword. It looked up at the sky with great pride and arrogance. Surutra was the annihilation that had descended on this tutorial sector. And so another world is swallowed up by the tower. Surutra appeared to be deep in contemplation. The fiery words it spoke were laced with all sorts of strong emotions like anger, resentment, and hatred. Being the 176th child, it was among the weaker children of Surtur, but in terms of appearance, it resembled Surtur the most. A world doomed to burn and vanish should have never been born. He got interrupted when he heard a voice. Hey, Surutra. Surutra's head turned. Compared to the giant, YuWon looked as small as a mouse. Unhappy its brooding was interrupted, Surutra glared down at YuWon. Are you going through menopause? Why are you so emotional when you're only the 176th child? Now stop being so moody, and let's get started. Surutra looked at YuWon and noticed his fiery eyes. He lowered his head and looked at YuWon. Upon taking a close look, surprise dawned on its face. You have the same eyes as him. YuWon immediately knew what Surutra meant by him because YuWon currently had the eyes of the monkey from Mount Wagwa. Surutra's put on a devilish smile. It was likely reminiscing an old memory. I wonder. Will you also be able to escape from here? The ground rose up, forming a giant, flaming chair. Surutra had used magic to create a throne so it could sit and look down at YuWon fighting. Once the demon sat down on its high resting place, it raised its flaming sword up high. All the surrounding skulls started to approach YuWon. And once they were close enough to him, YuWon held the sword and charged forward. YuWon's new item, the well-sharpened sword, broke apart one skull's cranium. And simultaneously, the skull's body exploded, and a black flame swallowed up YuWon. Impressive. Surutra couldn't help but compliment YuWon on taking down a skull with a single slash. The smoke from the explosion subsided, and YuWon resurfaced from the black clouds. A normal person would have been burned to a crisp from that explosion, but YuWon's level and constitution were already far beyond that of a normal person, reaching that of a superhuman. Also, the strength of items definitely couldn't be overlooked. Unharmed by the flames. That's no normal robe. Surutra recognized what YuWon was wearing. It was an item with a remarkably strong resistance to fire. Did you prepare that so you could defeat me? Pyromancy robe has negated the heat from a skull. Pyromancy robe increased the resistance against fire attribute attacks. YuWon shrugged his shoulders at Surutra's question. Nothing beats paying to win. YuWon looked around at the skulls surrounding him. I won't be running away, Surutra. YuWon smirked. He looked around at the surrounding skulls before looking up at Surutra sitting high on its throne. The tip of YuWon's sword slowly rose, pointing at Surutra. Because I'm going to defeat you. Surutra stared at the tip of YuWon's sword. Maybe it was due to its fiery anger, but the skulls that Surutra commanded stopped moving. You'll defeat me, you say? The crimson skies shook from its anger. The ground became even hotter, scorching flames rising violently from the crevices. Such arrogant and impudent words. Despite overflowing with anger, Surutra did not descend from its throne. Instead, it continued to look down at YuWon while resting its chin on its hand. Say that after you have managed to reach me, foolish human. Let's see how much longer you can last. The skull demon started to move again. Surutra managed to cool its anger and continue controlling its servants. YuWon scratched his head, knowing that this would be the case. There was no way Surutra would move from such light provocation. It really doesn't like getting off its throne, does it? YuWon had no choice now but to get close to Surutra itself. You're all talk, aren't you? YuWon started rotating his ankles while staring at the giant horde of skulls. YuWon jumped high into the center of the horde. And landed in the midst of the horde, destroying everything in his way with a single slash. You have leveled up. The system notified. YuWon spun. Creating momentum at the end of his sword, he swung it around as if he was a cutter. In an instant, 6 skulls were cut down. As YuWon destroyed the skulls, he noticed the fiery explosion. A flurry of explosions followed, and a thick smoke once again enveloped YuWon. YuWon was able to dodge the explosion with the help of the shield he bought. The magic nullification shield. It had excellent magic resistance, and cost a whopping 20,000 points. It was one of the items YuWon purchased specifically to protect himself in this fight. From within the smoke, YuWon jumped out while holding the huge shield. YuWon again charged towards the skulls and managed to kill multiple of them at the same time, creating a huge explosion. As YuWon retreated to avoid the explosion, he heard a voice. You leveled up. It was the system message. Agility, stamina, and magic increased by 1. YuWon thought that was always a delightful message to hear. After fighting for 2 hours, he had already leveled up 3 times, and the distribution of stats wasn't so bad either. Constitution, which was an essential stat at the moment, and arcane power, the hardest stat to raise, both increased. YuWon let out a deep sigh. Thanks to the increase in constitution, it relieved a bit of the tension in his lungs, but he still felt a bit cooked from breathing in nothing but hot air for 2 hours. Those skulls didn't have that strong of an attack. Their post-death explosions were problematic, not because they dealt a lot of damage, but because they were unavoidable. Without a ranged attack, I have no choice but to take their explosions head-on. YuWon was the kind of guy that liked to jump in and fight in the center of the battle. He did have Mana Blast in his arsenal, but that skill required too much mana. It wasn't a viable strategy for prolonged combat. As for my shield, a chip started to form in the magic nullification shield. It was at a point where it required maintenance. It's starting to reach its limit. YuWon had killed almost 1,000 skulls in the past 2 hours. It wasn't surprising that the shield was reaching its breaking point after taking all those explosions. Hey, Surutra! While looking at the greatly thinned horde of skulls, YuWon talked to Surutra for the first time in 2 hours. Why don't you come on down already? And let these small fry go home. YuWon's words made the red vein on Surutra's forehead convulse. YuWon had gotten pretty close to Surutra, to the point that he could reach Surutra whenever he felt like it. Surutra finally stopped resting its chin on its arm and got up. They truly are amazing items. As Surutra spoke, YuWon knew that the inevitable is coming. He has to fight the giant to accomplish his goals. Surutra suddenly jumped up. And in a flash, Surutra's giant body landed directly in front of YuWon. The ground shook. After descending from its throne, Surutra swung its gigantic sword up onto its shoulder. I'm honestly quite curious how you were able to get a hold of such items in the tutorial. Facing Surutra up close, YuWon felt far greater pressure than he had been experiencing. Surutra broiled the already hot air, to the point that it penetrated the heat resistance of the pyromancy robe. It was as expected of Surutra's child. What about you? Shouldn't you feel ashamed for going on a rampage in the tutorial? It is simply a punishment for those who are not worthy. I do find it odd, though. Surutra spoke. Surutra pointed its gigantic sword at YuWon. You are worthy. You have what it takes to climb the expansive tower and become a ranker. So why are you here? Did you perhaps sacrifice yourself for a comrade? Didn't I tell you already? YuWon said while picking his ear, annoyed by how loud Surutra was. I'm going to defeat you. You'll defeat me? Surutra erupted into laughter. I see. Well then, it's only right that I face you. Surutra raised its giant sword to the sky. YuWon looked up at the sword. The sword enveloped in demon fire looked hot enough to burn everything in the world to ashes. This will be it. YuWon clenched his teeth and held up his shield. He had already accumulated enough fiery aura inside his body and was ready for everything to be over. As Surutra's sword started descending, the magic nullification shield started displaying more fractures. The shield suddenly broke under the intense pressure of Surutra. Surutra's flaming sword landed directly on YuWon, crushing him into the ground. YuWon tensed his body to try and endure it. YuWon and Sun Ogong were never really all that close. As a battle maniac, Sun Ogong constantly nagged YuWon to fight him. Sun Ogong's reason was quite simple because it was fun. The main reason Sun Ogong won was his eyes, the golden cinder eyes. How I got these? YuWon once asked Sun Ogong. He had to know in case he ever needed to return to the past to escape from the war. It was quite unusual. Do you remember the tutorial? Which one? Number 3. Yeah, I failed that one. Well, there's a reason why I failed, but that's not what's important. What's important is what came after. Do you know what the annihilation that came to the tutorial was? YuWon silently stared at Sun Ogong, signaling him to go on. Enjoying YuWon's company, Sun Ogong smirked as he continued talking. Okay, listen closely. These eyes were. In the middle of Hongdae, a giant hole was created. The ground caved in from the flames of the sword. Surutra looked down into the hole created by the flamed sword. The hole was smoldering with crimson fire. This fire would never die unless Surutra ran out of power. Surutra thought that no matter how great the items he possessed were, YuWon should have either died or at least been gravely injured. How odd. It appeared to Surutra that YuWon purposely took the attack instead of dodging it. But why did YuWon purposely take on the hellfire? Surutra pondered while looking down into the depth of the crater. The ground beneath Surutra started trembling. He was confused as to what was happening. At that moment, from within the fiery pit, YuWon slowly walked out, his body scorched black. I thought I'd die from how hot it was. YuWon and Sun Ogong were never really all that close. As a battle maniac, Sun Ogong constantly nagged YuWon to fight him. Sun Ogong's reason was quite simple, because it was fun. YuWon found Sun Ogong annoying because of that. He wouldn't stop pestering YuWon for a fight when YuWon didn't enjoy fighting all that much in the first place. YuWon repeatedly lost against Sun Ogong. After hundreds of fights, YuWon had only managed to beat Sun Ogong a couple of times. There were a few reasons for that. Rijingyu, the staff capable of extending infinitely, flying Nimbus, the first cloud to ever come into existence, capable of raining down thunder and reaching the ends of space with its speed, and the infinite amount of arcane power he had gained by eating all the peaches of immortality in the Heavenly Peach Garden, a treasure of the heavenly realm. However, none of them were the main reason why Sun Ogong was so hard to fight against. It was his eyes, the golden cinder eyes. While breathing out, the fiery aura built up in his body, and his irises had turned scarlet. You have fulfilled the conditions for the hidden piece. Monkey's eyes will evolve. The system window popped up. The eyes are capable of observing and seeing through all of creation. The second stage of the golden cinder eyes. The power of the high ranker, the great sage, heaven's equal. A rank skill. It was nothing compared to master of mana, an authority of an administrator, but S-rank skills should have been unattainable in the tutorial anyways. And rank skills were so rare that even rankers only possessed a few of them. What was really great is that Cinder Eyes already had over 10% proficiency. The higher the rank of the skill, the harder it was to raise its proficiency. So, taking that into account, 12% honestly felt like cheating. You have obtained Cinder Eyes. Surutra's fire was indeed hot. But it wasn't just hot. YuWon's entire body was engulfed in flame, burning his skin off. It was a level of pain that would have made anyone with weak focus and mental fortitude go insane. That was what he felt while wearing the pyromancy robe. But what about Sun Ogong? His body defies all logic. Without any special items, Sun Ogong was able to hold his ground against Surutra until he obtained the Cinder Eyes. Sun Ogong told YuWon that he was physically on another level from birth. Turned out he wasn't exaggerating. YuWon stared back at Surutra. And when their eyes locked, Surutra's eyes widened. Your eyes. Everything looked new with his flaming eyes. His body's senses felt as fired up as a forge's roaring furnace, and he felt as if he was constantly in the heat of battle. So this is Cinder Eyes. There were 3 stages to the Golden Cinder Eyes. The first is Monkey's Eyes. Eyes that Sun Ogong, the monkey of Mount Huagua, possessed. The second was Cinder Eyes, eyes that swallowed demon fire. The only way to awaken the Cinder Eyes was to swallow a demon's fire with the hidden piece of the tutorial, and imbue them into your eyes. I never thought a day would come when I would respect that idiot. YuWon thought in mind. Thanks, Surutra. The high ranker's power had now descended into YuWon's eyes. YuWon extended his arm, and the space in front of him started to ripple. It was his mid-grade personal inventory. YuWon reached both his hands into his inventory, and from within, he pulled out a weapon and a medicine ball. The icy aura of the Arctic Steel's sword seeped into YuWon's body. It started to cool him down. It collided with the fiery aura that had accumulated within his body, and the two nullified each other. This, of course, wasn't all that YuWon had prepared. Now, why don't we get started? Do you want to get started? Surutra smirked faintly. It was shocked after seeing YuWon walk out of the flaming pit, but the surprise didn't last too long. YuWon's body was covered in burns, not to mention he was unable to dissipate the fiery aura from within his body. And what exactly do you want to start when your body's in such a state? It was only natural for Surutra to look down on YuWon. It was not only the child of the giant Surtur, it was also a demon, one of the races that ruled the tower. Though it was weaker due to the restrictions of the tutorial, it still couldn't help but look at the gravely wounded YuWon as nothing more than a pest. This is nothing. YuWon swallowed the 2 medicine balls. You have consumed an ice crystal. You have consumed an ice crystal. Your body temperature steadily drops. The system notified. Surutra squinted its eye, closely observing the sword in YuWon's hand. A sword with a white blade and hilt. The oddly colored, simple-looking sword radiated an icy aura that felt like one touch would give you frostbite. And also the ice crystal that YuWon consumed to subside the fiery energy inside his body. The neutralizing status effect, burn. The system notified. Attribute, cold energy has been added to your arcane power. The extreme heat and awful burn that enveloped YuWon disappeared. But in their place, a deep chill took over his body. YuWon started breathing out the frost. And even though he was still surrounded by a sea of fire, he could no longer feel the heat. It was thanks to the 2 ice crystals he consumed and the Arctic Steel sword in his hand. I actually feel a bit chilly now. The ice crystals and the Arctic Steel sword possessed an aura that was the polar opposite of fire, especially the Arctic Steel sword. It was forged from a glacier and was sharper than most steel swords. The Arctic Steel sword possessed a powerful icy aura, but as a side effect, it slowly froze the user. That's why. This just might be doable. Surutra flinched from the aura emanating from the sword. It realized that the aura coming off of YuWon and the sword could actually hurt it. Now that YuWon had obtained the Cinder Eyes, it was finally time to defeat Surutra. YuWon stepped foot onto the level ground as Surutra's sword swung down at him. A giant flame engulfed YuWon. Instead of trying to dodge it, he swung his sword at the fire. Pyromancy Robe is resisting Surutra's flames of annihilation. Pyromancy Robe has gained additional resistance against fire attribute attacks. YuWon used his full power to resist Surutra's attack. This was an attack that just moments ago broke the magic nullification shield and almost killed YuWon. Cinder Eyes are resisting Surutra's flames of annihilation. Pyromany Robe is absorbing Surutra's flames of annihilation. Your body temperature is rapidly decreasing. However, in a short span of time, things changed greatly. Resisting status effect, burn. Surutra eyes flinched as he looked at YuWon resisting the same attacks that buried him underground before. Cinder Eyes, Pyromancy Robe, as well as the Ice Crystal and the Arctic Steel Sword. The combined forces of the skills and items allowed YuWon to cut through Surutra's flames. YuWon managed to cut a path through the flames for himself. Leaping high into the air, YuWon entered Surutra's personal space near its waist and slashed Surutra's torso, cutting through its armor of fire. Surutra screamed in agony. You! The Arctic Steel Sword was indeed great at cutting. In return for slowly freezing the user with its icy aura, the sword was capable of slicing and freezing almost anything. Hot blood spouted from the wound to Surutra's torso. It was working. Normally, such a feat would be inconceivable because one couldn't normally pierce through Surutra's armor of fire, even with high strength and arcane power stats. Yet YuWon had managed to do exactly that thanks to the power of the Arctic Steel Sword and the Ice Crystals. Surutra became enraged, its body slowly turning black. And from within its hand, a crimson and black infernal flame materialized. The onyx-colored flame was most definitely a threat. I need to dodge it. YuWon activated one of the powers of the Cinder Eyes, Battle Prediction. YuWon's vision was tinted red thanks to the power of Cinder Eyes. And within his vision, a path was drawn. He could instinctively feel it. That was where he had to move to. Surutra's black flames started incinerating the entire area. The black flames differed from the normal fire that was prevalent until a moment ago. Instead of simply scorching the ground, these flames were capable of completely melting the earth away. It was one of the authorities of a demon, the ability to call forth hellfire. Thankfully, YuWon was able to avoid being incinerated by the black flames. But he was unable to come out fully unscathed. He tried to dissipate the heat with the Arctic Steel sword, but it was no use. He wasn't strong enough to fight against Surutra yet. You have consumed an ice crystal. You have consumed an ice crystal. 2 crystals weren't enough. YuWon pulled out the other 2 ice crystals from his inventory and swallowed them. You are now affected by the status effect frostbite. Your body temperature greatly drops. The icy aura of the Arctic Steel sword had been gradually taking over YuWon's body. Despite the fact that he was being blasted with heat, his body was now full of icy aura. To get burned and frostbite at the same time. YuWon had faced all sorts of situations in the tower, but this was the first time he had experienced anything like this. It won't last much longer. The ice attribute was a natural weakness for a giant of fire like Surutra, but the problem was that YuWon wasn't physically capable of handling so much icy aura yet. I need to finish this quickly. With this icy aura, he could somewhat fight against Surutra's flames. His heart and chest felt like they were now frozen solid. Feeling as if he was suffocating from the cold, YuWon let out a deep breath, barely managing to exhale some of the icy aura within him. While he was exhaling, Surutra's sword descended upon him. The black flames split apart the earth. YuWon twisted his body, dodging the attack, moving away from the melting ground. There is no reason for me to reserve my mana anymore, YuWon thought. YuWon's sword flashed with bright light. He activated the skill, Arcane Sword. YuWon ran towards Surutra. YuWon jumped at Surutra's legs. He was running out of time. He no longer had the luxury of conserving his mana. The Arcane Sword extended a few inches beyond the Arctic Steel sword. YuWon swung his sword against Surutra's leg with all his might. YuWon inflicted a clean cut on Surutra's leg. Surutra cried in agony. Losing its balance from the loss of one leg, Surutra fell to its knees with a thud. Searching for YuWon, Surutra quickly raised its head, but before it could find him, Skill Mana Blast activated. A white ball of ice mana flew right into Surutra's face. Surutra was stunned for a moment before he could react. A mana blast reinforced with the power of the ice crystal landed a direct hit to Surutra's face, creating a huge blast of ice energy. Surutra's flaming head froze in an instant. This caused Surutra to lose its balance and sway. But it didn't last long. For YuWon, disrupting Surutra's balance for just a moment was more than enough. I can see it. With the power of the Cinder Eyes, the world appeared like it had slowed down a tempo. Fire rose from Surutra's head once again. Surutra might have a weakness against ice, but the difference in power between Surutra and YuWon was far too great. Surutra's swaying body was definitely large, but it wasn't impossible to climb up, so YuWon got on top of Surutra's back. Feeling YuWon standing on its neck, Surutra shook its head. You insolent punk! How dare you! You're a brat that hasn't even climbed the tower yet. Surutra spoke in a rage. Flames started raging across Surutra's body. They were the flames of annihilation. It was a fire that was mixed with black hellfire, the fire that would destroy this tutorial. And YuWon was not yet at a level where he could handle these flames. Attribute: Cold energy is resisting Surutra's flames of annihilation. The system notified. Pyromancy robe is resisting Surutra's flames of annihilation. YuWon had prepared various countermeasures against Surutra's fire. However, even with all those preparations, his body was still being burnt black. That was the power of the third tutorial's annihilation and the gap in power between YuWon and Surutra. Cinder Eyes is resisting Surutra's flames of annihilation. Cinder Eyes is absorbing Surutra's flames of annihilation. But still, YuWon was standing his ground with only his sheer will. You have failed to resist Surutra's flames of annihilation. Status effect: burn increased to level 2. The system started giving off warnings. Status effect: burn increased to level 3. YuWon held his Arctic sword embedded with the power of the skill Arcane Sword. It flashed. Your fire resistance increased by 1. YuWon managed to get on top of Surutra's head. The low-class demon Surutra only possessed a single fatal weakness. I'll be the one to win. He spoke loudly as he wielded his Arctic steel sword in reverse. Surutra screamed after realizing that YuWon had managed to get on its head. Wait! YuWon's sword dug deep into its head, and the sword slowly dissipated the icy aura into Surutra. The attack created a wave of chilly aura that spread everywhere. The Arctic steel sword forged from pure ice broke under the huge pressure of different energies colliding together. As a result, the flames of annihilation on Surutra's body were extinguished. And then, you have defeated the annihilation of the tutorial. YuWon laughed out loud as he put his broken sword inside his inventory. You have leveled up. I finally did it. I finally achieved my goal of defeating the giant. YuWon finally felt at ease and breathed a sigh of relief. And to think that this was only the start of everything that he planned on doing moving forward. He let out a cheerful smile. You have leveled up. The system messages started popping one after another, and YuWon gained multiple levels with a single fight. This really is a turbulent journey, you idiots, he mumbled while remembering his comrades that decided to send him back to the past. This was just the third tutorial. He still had a long way to go. While his consciousness faded, sweet messages continued to ring in his head. You have accomplished an inconceivable achievement. Due to accomplishing an impossible achievement, the calculation of your reward will be delayed. The system notified. That's all for today. If you like the next part of this manhwa, just comment below. Thanks for watching, and please don't forget to like, subscribe and comment for getting epic content on this channel. See you next time.